continuing talking about Palm Sunday, Easter, after Easter appearances, and so we're in that after Easter time. The 20th chapter of John ends with these words. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Which is an ending. So the original gospel stopped with chapter 20. But then there was more information. And chapter 21 is in our scriptures. And chapter 21 kind of lifts up the importance of Jesus' compassion to his disciples, as well as the importance of Peter and John. And this was written 50, 60 years after the occurrences that it talks about. And Peter, who was martyred in Rome in sometime maybe the 50s, 56, 57 in the Christian era, he's been dead quite a while. But his influence has continued because he was picked out by Jesus to be the lead disciple. He called, remember Peter's nickname was the Rock. And sometimes that was kind of like how Peter thought, like a rock. But Jesus kept trying to bring him along and teach him, and he became a powerful leader eventually. So it seems in chapter 21 that we are in, I'm not quite to this yet, but we're in the Sea of Galilee, which is about 80 miles north of Jerusalem. And that's where the disciples were with Jesus after the resurrection. And so some time has passed. Because in those days, traveling 80 miles, that country can be pretty rugged. So this would take a while. And so they're up by the Sea of Galilee, and they're trying to figure out what to do next. And remember, Peter was, by trade, a fisherman, as was his brother. And so he said, let's go fishing. And they fished and fished, and they fished all night. And they used nets somehow to fish, and nothing was caught. And so the sun was coming up, and they see a figure on the shore, and the figure says, put your nets on the other side of the boat. Now, if you're a fisherman, you know that there's a lot of lures that are created not to catch fish, but to catch fishermen. There are little gadgets and colors, and some of them make noise and stuff like that. Because if you're fishing and you're not catching anything, you're kind of desperate for anything that might work. And so these disciples say, okay, let's try the other side of the boat. And, well, something kind of crazy happens. All of a sudden, the nets are full of fish. And then they kind of wonder, who is that person on the shore? And Peter realizes that it's Jesus, and so he gets excited and he jumps in the water. So he swims to shore, and while they're bringing the boat with all the fish. Okay, then it says, they had gone ashore, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish on it and bread. And Jesus said, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. Why did they say there's 153? Well, maybe there was 153 fish and somebody had counted. I understood that could be a number that represents all the nations and people of the world in their time. Or if you take the numbers 1 through 17 and add them all together, it comes up with 153. I don't know what it's a square root of, but I mean, there's different explanations of why. But numbers in Bible times, they had meaning. And actually 17 was kind of a neat number. It was kind of represented perfection. The net was not torn, and Jesus said, "Come and have breakfast." Now, none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them and did the same with the fish. And it was now the third time that Jesus had appeared to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. And when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And Peter said, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." And a second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." And he said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter felt hurt because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said in response, "Lord, you know everything, and you know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." And then he says, "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you to where you do not wish to go." In parenthesis, he said this to indicate the kind of death by which he would glorify God, in a parenthesis. And after this, Jesus said, "Follow me." Well, we talked about fishing. Let's talk about farming. Have any of you messed with sheep at all? Know anything about sheep? Talked to a friend of mine last week about that grew up on a farm, and they had cattle and sheep. And he said, lambs are a lot of work because they're usually born in January. And, this is further north, and it's cold. And the ewes are kind of funny about the lambs because sometimes they reject their babies. And if they have twins, which they sometimes do, they only will feed one of them. And so unless the farmer wants to lose the lamb, the farmer is now the mama ewe, and every 6 hours, that lamb has to have a bottle of milk. Now, it can be cow's milk. They don't milk the sheep, but and if the lamb isn't taken care of properly, it's not going to make it, and the farmer loses. And also, you've seen these romantic pictures of the shepherd with the crook and the sheep following the shepherd and so on like that. Well, it doesn't really work that way in real life. If the shepherd has a border collie, maybe. But sheep are very, very, let's say, headstrong, stubborn. They go where they want to go. And if you're in the way of where they want to go, they will run over you. They will actually jump on you and try to knock you down. So this kind of romantic idea of these placid sheep that all smell wonderful and the cute little lambs hopping around. When Jesus said, "Take care of the lambs, tend the sheep," that's not necessarily this real romantic idea of just this idyllic farm. Because there's work involved and there's some risk. But Peter kept saying, "Oh yes, Lord, you know I love you." Now, Jesus has maybe surprised Peter because he keeps coming to him and he keeps asking him these questions. And we have Peter as the famous disciple who denied Jesus 3 times. Well, all the rest of them ran away. Peter was interested in saving himself because if he said he knew who Jesus was or was one of the disciples, then he might have been also arrested and maybe even crucified. Romans didn't hesitate to do that to anybody they thought was causing problems. So Peter, who thought maybe his life was worth more than saying I'm one of the disciples, at one time could have been pretty embarrassed when Jesus asked him again 3 times, do you love me? I thought about that 3-time thing. If any of you were, I don't know if this is true, the female side of the lodge, but there are 3 steps in lodge membership. If you're getting married in a traditional ceremony, there are 3 steps to that. First, the officiant asks you, do you 2 want to get married? And then the officiant asks if you will say these vows to one another. And then there was the exchange of rings. So there's kind of these 3 stages of commitment. Okay, so we have, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, take care of my sheep, and so on like that. Now, we know Jesus isn't a farmer or a rancher. And sometimes it's real easy to tell, is he talking about something real or is he talking about an example or a metaphor or a symbol? At one point, the ruler of Galilee was Herod, I can't remember. And Jesus referred to him as that fox. Well, he wasn't really a fox. We know that's obvious. Or Jesus referred to himself as the door. But he wasn't really a door. And when Jesus asked Peter to take care of his sheep, he's not literally a farmer. So who were the sheep? Peter was kind of like the head disciple, whether he wanted to be or not. So the sheep was the other disciples or the early church or the people who might follow Jesus. And does that have anything to do with you? It's interesting how Jesus keeps coming back and having such a word that is positive. He could have come back being really angry at all these people that had turned against him and how he'd been so cruelly killed and all that. But he doesn't do any of that. It's like, I'm not going to embarrass you or make you grovel or whatever. You failed, but we're not going to rub it in. Although we like to do that, we like to make ourselves better than others. I read about an experiment in which people were given a couple of options. There were coins on a table. There was a quarter and a nickel. And then there was a row that had 3 dimes and a quarter. And people said, okay, you can choose from one of those 2 lines. If you take the quarter, then we're going to give the nickel to the person that you're with. And it was somebody they didn't know. Or if you take the 3 dimes, we'll give the quarter to the person you're with. Again, someone they didn't know. What was the surprising result of that? More people than not took the quarter so the person with them would have the nickel. They gave up 5 cents so that they would have a bigger difference between them and the other person. And sometimes we are just like that, you know. We kind of enjoy the mistakes of other people. But Jesus didn't. And he had this wonderful method of warming up to people, obviously. He offered them safety. And those who had done wrong were given fresh language to wrap up their failures. Unconditional love in the midst of humiliation. One of the things I asked for when I started here was a pastoral relations committee. And there was something, if you read the newsletter, there was something about that this week. And I asked 5 people that I know to kind of represent the congregation, to make sure that there's communication that's going both ways. You know, now there's lots of channels to communicate. And I consider myself a fairly open person. I think people would talk to me, but I just want to make sure that if there's issues and all that, that we have a way that people can communicate that. And if people don't want to talk to me, they can talk to a member of the committee. And when the committee met, we talked about this. You all have high expectations. I'm going to fail. Some of those. And we need to be real and accepting of our failures. And I think that committee is kind of how we need to, you know, be living as a church too. That not everything we try is going to work. Not every word that we say is going to be loving. We're going to say things that are misinterpreted and misheard, and we're going to do things that sometimes come from bad motivations, but that's just life. Let's be real with one another. And Jesus got real with Peter and said, you love me and feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. And what does that love mean? I mean, how do you love Jesus? Remember Fiddler on the Roof? Okay, little video. Watch for how that word love is used. Do they love each other? Golda says, you know, I cooked your meals and milked your cow and all these other things. Love is communicated in a lot of different ways. So Jesus says to Peter, do you love me? Is that your question too? I mean, we're disciples of Jesus like Peter was, but is his a unique circumstance? Is he asking us, do we love him? Now, Jesus talked about loving God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and your neighbor as yourself. How does he figure in all that love? These few post-resurrection experiences of Jesus are really informative. They are really speaking to God's priorities. No revenge, no retribution. Jesus spent his time feeding his friends, strengthening them, restoring them. On Easter Day, he comforts Mary Magdalene. A week later, he shows his wounds so that Thomas might see. Today, he grills bread and fish for hungry disciples. He heals what is wounded in Peter to enable him to be the leader that he would become. At the the height of his power, Jesus chose humility. It's like family. It's like understanding. Yeah, there are mistakes, but there's something deeper that binds us together. Fishing, farming, failure, and family. It's the story from John 20.